He told her to wait in the car, said it was a family dinner. Helen Wilkes, widow and retired payroll clerk, waited for 94 minutes in the freezing cold, watching her son toast wine inside the restaurant she'd helped him afford. By sunrise, she'd located the deed, opened her trust binder, and called the estate lawyer her husband once trusted with everything. They thought she'd never act, but while they were busy posing for family photos without her, Helen was drafting a notice that would make sure it was their last dinner in her home. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. They ate inside. I watched from the windshield. The heater in Daniel's SUV had stopped blowing warm air 15 minutes ago. The engine was off, always off when parked. Gas wasn't cheap, he'd once said. Helen sat quietly in the front passenger seat, gloved hands folded in her lap, her coat zipped to her chin, her purse clutched like armor. The restaurant windows glowed gold against the cold February dusk. Through them she could see the family table. Tessa's hair shimmered under the overhead lights as she laughed wide, unbothered. Daniel leaned toward her, smiling like a man whose conscience didn't itch. Across from them sat Tessa's parents, relaxed, drinking wine, forks and stories in motion. No one had looked out. Earlier that evening, Daniel had pulled into the strip mall parking lot and cut the engine without ceremony. "It's just family tonight," he said, not meeting her eyes. "We'll be quick." He got out before she could say anything. Tessa never even turned around. The back door thudded shut behind them. Helen hadn't asked to come. She'd only asked if they needed help with Aiden's science project. He hadn't even been invited, apparently. He was working late at the auto shop. She didn't mind the quiet, but being dismissed so easily, that she minded. 47 minutes in, her toes went numb. She adjusted the scarf around her neck and pressed her thumb against the fogged window. A waiter refilled someone's glass inside. Tessa's mother took a photo, flash-lit the table for half a second. No one looked toward the parking lot. No one wondered if she was okay. Helen wasn't angry. Not yet. The feeling was lower, slower, like cold water filling a basin. At minute 62, a man parked beside her rolled down his window, asked if she needed help. "I'm just waiting on my son," she said. He looked toward the restaurant, then back at her. "That's a long wait." "Yes," she said. "Yes, it is." At minute 94, Daniel and Tessa reappeared, strolling like the cold hadn't hurried them. Tessa's heels clicked on the pavement, voice still bright from wine and approval. Tessa slid into the driver's seat and started the ignition. "Thanks for being flexible," she said, as if Helen had just rescheduled a haircut, not frozen for over an hour without so much as a text. Helen looked straight ahead. "You're welcome," she said. Nothing else. The ride home was quiet. The air vents struggled to thaw the tension. Tessa scrolled on her phone. Daniel hummed along to the radio like they hadn't left his mother in a running advertisement for abandonment. Back at the house, Helen got out before the engine shut off. She didn't slam the door, didn't look back, just walked up the driveway, her boots crunching softly against the salt-dusted concrete, past the front steps she'd swept herself that morning. Inside her room, the quiet returned, warm this time. She took off her coat, hung it neatly, removed her shoes, then she sat at the small cherrywood desk her husband had built 30 years ago, reached for the drawer on the left, the one with the worn brass pull, and opened it. The papers were exactly where she'd last left them. Folders organized by year, tabs labeled in her steady, no-nonsense script. She passed her finger over each one until it landed on the thick, cream-colored envelope marked Deed Wilkes Residence. She pulled it free, laid it on the desk like something sacred. The house they lived in, Daniel, Tessa, and Aiden sat under her name alone. It had been that way since the mortgage was paid off. She had never added Daniel to the title, despite years of passive hints and small requests masked as jokes. "Should probably get my name on it in case anything happens, right?" he'd said once. He hadn't asked again after that. Helen unfolded the papers, scanned the notarized lines with their fading black ink. No ambiguity, no loopholes. Her name, Helen Louise Wilkes, the only one that mattered. From down the hall came the muffled sound of a television sitcom laugh track. Then the refrigerator door opened, then closed. Someone laughed. She reached under the file folders and pulled out a legal pad. The top sheet was blank. She clicked her pen. To Mr. Abramson. Subject Wilkes Living Trust Update. Her hand hovered over the page. Then she began to write. "They split the check. I own the car that got them there. The irony tasted bitter in Helen's mouth as she sat at her kitchen table the next morning, steam rising from the untouched coffee in front of her. A thin February light filtered through the blinds, catching on the edges of the paperwork she'd laid out with surgical precision. One manila folder, one pen, one laptop, and a ledger of sacrifices that no one had noticed, much less thanked her for. She opened her banking app, fingers steady, eyes sharp, transaction history, a trail of quiet responsibility. Property tax, paid in full. Homeowner's insurance, she'd renewed it last November without a word to Daniel. And the vehicle Daniel drove, the same SUV she'd waited in the night before, still had 2 payments left, both auto-debited from her account. Not his, hers. She clicked into the title folder on her desktop. A scanned PDF loaded slowly. The Wi-Fi always crawled on cold mornings until her name emerged in bold legal font. Helen L. Wilkes, sole owner. There was no co-signer, no Daniel, no Tessa. Helen didn't feel smug. She felt alert, like someone realizing the gun in her pocket had been loaded the whole time. Her email browser pinged, a new message from her garden club. She deleted it. Another ping, neighborhood watch bulletin, deleted. Then a different name appeared in bold, one she hadn't seen since last tax season. Mr. Abramson, her late husband's estate lawyer. She paused, then typed deliberately. Subject Living Trust Review. Hi Bill, can we set up a time to update my trust documentation? I'd like to explore a few contingencies. Helen Wilkes. She clicked send, then closed the laptop and stood, stretching slowly. Her bones ached from the night in the cold, but her mind felt sharper than it had in years. From the living room she could hear the familiar rhythms of Daniel and Tessa bickering over breakfast logistics. The cadence was always the same. Tessa criticized, Daniel retreated, then both pretended nothing had happened. It had become their morning ritual, as dependable as the paper arriving late. She poured her coffee down the sink, rinsed the mug, and opened her phone. There it was, a bright, curated moment that stung in ways she hadn't expected. Tessa had posted a photo from the dinner. The caption, Wilkes family dinner night, grateful for moments like these. 4 wine glasses, 2 couples, 1 filtered glow. Helen wasn't in the photo. Of course not. She hadn't even been in the restaurant. She stared at it a long time. Then she heard the front door shut. Tessa was off to her yoga class, or her boutique internship, or whatever title she gave her days now. Daniel's car keys jingled faintly near the coat rack. He didn't say goodbye as he left. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Aiden, sorry about tonight. I thought they were gonna include you. I didn't know. Helen looked at his message, then read it again. Then once more. She didn't reply. Not yet. But she saved the text. Just as she tucked the phone back in her pocket, another email dinged. From William Abramson. Subject, Reliving Trust Review. Absolutely. Want to meet in person? We can discuss contingencies and any special clauses you're considering. I have time this week. Helen closed the fridge, where she'd just replaced a half carton of eggs. She stood for a moment, hand on the handle, the cool air brushing against her skin. Then she let the door close gently, sealing it all in. They pulled out chairs for everyone but me. Helen stood at the top of the stairs, her hand resting lightly on the oak banister, heart steady but cold. Downstairs she could hear silverware clinking, glasses tapping, and Tessa's shrill laugh ringing through the house like a bell that had long outstayed its welcome. The smells floated up, roasted rosemary chicken, buttery rolls, something cheesy and baked. Helen had cooked it all that morning. Not one dish had been prepped by Tessa. Not one thank you had been offered. Dinner's going to be just for the 6 of us, Tessa had said earlier with her polished smile. Would you mind relaxing in your room tonight? I really want my parents to feel like they're hosting here, you know? Helen nodded, tight-lipped. The polite kind of nod people gave at funerals or when they were too tired to fight. She hadn't said she paid for the groceries, or that she'd picked up Tessa's mother's gluten-free baguette from a specialty shop 20 minutes out of the way. She'd just turned, climbed the stairs slowly, and shut her door behind her. Now, sitting on the edge of her bed with a blanket across her knees, Helen lifted the plastic-wrapped plate they'd left at her door. The food had already cooled, and the foil had fogged. She peeled it back and poked at the chicken. Damp, stringy, forgotten. She didn't eat much. The meal tasted like an afterthought. The room buzzed faintly with conversation downstairs. At one point someone said, "She's still upstairs, right?" Then Daniel's voice softened but clear. "She's better off resting anyway." Helen didn't blink. She reached for the brass lamp on her nightstand, turned it on with a quiet click, and opened the notebook she kept tucked behind the photo of her late husband. Her pen moved with certainty. Contingency clause, activate. She underlined it twice, then closed the notebook and slid it back in place. Her phone rang almost immediately, the old-school ringtone she'd assigned to Janelle, her older sister in Florida. It sounded like a bell tower warning of a storm. "You want me to fly up?" Janelle didn't waste time with greetings. Helen glanced at the wall clock. Dinner was probably moving into dessert. "Not yet," she said, "but be ready. You say the word, I'm on the next damn plane. You know I don't like how he talks to you." "Never did." Helen didn't respond to that. They both knew it was true. She only said, "I'll let you know." She was about to hang up when a knock tapped gently at her bedroom door. Aiden. He opened it slowly, holding a small piece of pie wrapped in a napkin. "I saved you some," he said. "It's cherry, your favorite." Helen smiled, truly smiled. "Thank you, sweetheart." He sat at the edge of the bed, shoulders slumped in a way that spoke volumes. "They didn't even ask if you wanted to come downstairs," he said. "It was like they just assumed." Helen took the pie, set it on the nightstand, then reached out and squeezed his hand. "They don't see what they're doing," he muttered. "But I do." Helen nodded. "I know you do." Aiden stayed a minute longer, then stood. "I have homework. Just wanted to check in." "Thank you, Aiden. That means more than you think." After he left, Helen stood slowly, her joints protesting from the cold. She walked to the antique desk across the room, opened her laptop, and logged into her email. She read Mr. Abramson's last message again. His tone had been calm, supportive. He'd used words like contingent authority and special rights preserved under trust law. She began to type a response, short, deliberate, subject trigger request. "Bill, I'd like to initiate conditional transfer options under the Wilkes Trust. Please prepare the relevant documents." She hovered over the send button for only a moment. Then she clicked. "They called it their home. I called it my investment." Helen stared at the document open on her screen. Its language was old legalese from a different decade, but the meaning had aged well. Her late husband, meticulous to the last, had built their estate trust with more than finances in mind. He had included a clause buried deep in the living trust that Helen had never touched until now. Section 7b. Reversionary rights upon neglect or disrespect to grantor, contingent on documentation. Helen whispered the words aloud like an incantation. She remembered the night he'd added it. Rain tapping on the windows, the kitchen light casting halos on the paperwork. "I want you to have a lever, in case the worst parts of people show up," he'd said. She hadn't understood what he meant back then. She did now. She dialed Mr. Abramson and didn't have to wait long. His voice came through the receiver like a velvet gavel, calm, final. "You found the dignity clause," he said without preamble. "I did. Rare but ironclad. Your husband was a man of precision." "Yes," Helen replied, scanning the paragraph again. "He planned for things I was too decent to imagine." She didn't sound bitter. She sounded prepared. Abramson's tone sharpened. "If you have documentation, I can move forward immediately." Helen reached into her filing cabinet and pulled out a binder labeled Household Activity Log. Inside, dates were written neatly in blue ink, appointments she was left to schedule alone, groceries that went unpaid, days she cooked 3 meals and was still asked to be invisible. "I've got logs going back 8 months, she said, "and I've been updating them daily." She didn't mention that she had started the habit after the first time Tessa rolled her eyes and said, "We really need to figure out assisted care for her." The line went quiet for a beat, then Abramson cleared his throat. "Email me scanned copies tonight. If it holds, we'll proceed to a formal warning." Helen looked at the stack and nodded, more to herself than him. "It holds." Later that evening, Aiden knocked softly and peeked into her room with his usual hesitant smile. "You need anything?" he asked. "Mom and Dad went out." "Come in," Helen said. "I actually do." She sat beside him at her desk and opened a flash drive. On it were screenshots of unanswered texts, photos of her bedroom door with meals left outside, even the weekly pillbox still full on Sundays. "I need help printing these." Aiden leaned in, quiet at first, then his brow furrowed. "These are all yours?" "Yes. No one ever told me." His voice trailed off, then steadied. "I can get them printed at school. My friend's dad owns a UPS store. I'll use their printer. You'll have them tomorrow." Helen reached over and touched his hand. "Thank you, Aiden." Before leaving, he asked, "Is this about the house?" "In a way," she said. "It's about the terms of respect and what happens when they're broken." The next morning, he delivered a folder labeled Proofs. The images were clear, the timestamps visible. It felt cold, clinical, exactly what she needed. She added the folder to the binder and placed it atop the envelope marked Loss of Dignity Submission, Wilkes Estate. That afternoon, she sat in the quiet living room with her tea, feet tucked beneath her. Tessa's voice echoed faintly from the upstairs loft. "So glad we made this house our own," she said on a video call. Helen smiled. Tessa hadn't noticed the change in tone lately. She was still performing ownership, but Helen was done playing along. Her phone buzzed. A message from Mr. Abramson. "You have full authority. We can file the warning notice this week." Helen stared at the screen, her reflection flickering faintly in the glass. "They stuck me in a car. I stuck a letter on their refrigerator." It was 6:13 a.m. when Helen walked downstairs, slippered feet soft against the tile. The house was still asleep the way she preferred it. In her hand, a crisp manila envelope, sealed and weighted with more than paper. The kitchen lights buzzed faintly as she flicked them on. She moved calmly, with precision, as if placing each step within invisible lines she'd drawn long ago. The envelope split open cleanly, and she pulled out a single printed sheet. Notice of intent to initiate transfer of property ownership. Wilkes Trust, Section 4 activation. Effective immediately. 30 days to vacate. Helen smoothed the corners and taped the letter to the center of the fridge door using 4 symmetrical strips of painter's tape. Blue, gentle on the surface but firm. Just like her. By the time the coffee began to perk in the French press, she was already back upstairs, folding the last sweater into her suitcase. At 7:21 a.m., Daniel walked in, hair unbrushed, yawning as he opened the fridge for creamer. He froze, silence stretched. Then, "Is this a joke?" Helen stepped into the kitchen, wheeling her carry-on behind her. "It's a notice." His voice jumped an octave. "What is this? A prank? Some kind of warning?" "No," she said. "Warnings came months ago. This is execution." He looked at her like she'd spoken in another language. "You're kicking us out?" "No," Helen replied softly. "You did that, the moment you started treating me like I was a problem instead of a person." Tessa appeared, her silk robe cinched and face still lined from sleep. She read the notice in seconds, then turned toward Helen, one hand on her hip. "You wouldn't." Helen met her gaze. "You did." Tessa scoffed. "You don't have the right. I have the trust. I have the deed. I have the clause. And now I have the will." She paused. "And you have 30 days. The suitcase wheels clicked against the floor as Helen rolled it to the door. She didn't slam it. She didn't need to. The silence she left behind was louder than any shouting. By 8:05 she checked into a boutique hotel just off Polaris Parkway. Nothing fancy, but it had clean sheets, a window view, and most importantly, distance. She didn't turn on the TV. She didn't answer her phone. She simply unpacked her toothbrush, hung her coat in the closet, and let herself breathe for the first time in months. Back at the house, Daniel called Mr. Abramson 3 times, left voicemails each time. None were returned before noon. He paced the living room, glancing up at the notice like it might suddenly rewrite itself. Tessa vented in fragments. "She can't just, what about Aiden? This is our home." At 3:17 p. Memlenti. Aiden arrived home from school, backpack slung low, his face tight with something unreadable. He saw the paper, didn't ask a single question. He went straight to his room, reappeared 10 minutes later. Helen's phone buzzed. "Aiden, 3:32 p.m. I left you something in your mailbox." No one saw. Helen slipped on her shoes and headed down to the hotel lobby, where a small mailbox key had been assigned to her at check-in. Inside, tucked between a pizza flyer and a credit union offer, was a folded index card. In Aiden's handwriting, "You're the only one who ever made this house feel like home. Proud of you." Aiden held it for a long moment, her hand trembling just slightly, then she slid it into her wallet, behind her driver's license. That evening, the sun dipped below the snow-laced rooftops of suburban Columbus, painting the skyline with the faded pink of quiet vengeance. Her phone lit up again. "Mr. Abramson." Text from Bill Abramson, 6:02 p.m. "County filing complete. You're on record. Full legal control has been reinstated." Helen didn't smile, but she turned off her bedside lamp with the quiet finality of someone who had just changed the rules of the game. Helen stood at the post office counter with a blank change of address form and a pen that didn't quite glide. Her handwriting, usually so measured, looked almost aggressive against the crisp form. Every letter she wrote reasserted what had been quietly stolen from her for months: visibility. The woman behind the counter gave a polite nod as she processed the paperwork. Want to forward everything, or just priority? Everything, Helen replied, her voice calm, clipped, especially the utility bills. That afternoon, Helen sat in the lobby of her hotel, not grand, but freshly vacuumed and quiet, sipping chamomile from a styrofoam cup while her fingers worked through her laptop. With each click, she rerouted accounts, electric, gas, water, internet, all back into her name. One by one, she erased Daniel's login credentials, then set new passwords only she could retrieve. Within hours, the fallout began. A delivery driver rang the Wilkes residence doorbell, holding a large floral box addressed to Tessa. He double-checked the address. Daniel furrowed his brow and signed for it. The next morning, another package arrived, a dress from an expensive boutique. This time, the driver didn't hand it over. Package returned to sender, he said. Non-authorized occupant. What does that mean? Tessa asked, bewildered. It means someone filed ownership change documentation, he said, checking the handheld scanner. Legally, this property now belongs to a Helen L. Wilkes. Tessa's face twisted like she'd bitten into something rotten. Daniel called Helen that evening. Voice a mixture of wounded ego and cracked confidence. You've gone too far, he started. Messing with deliveries? Come on, Mom. Helen was quiet for a long beat. Then she said, feel free to file, I already did. Click. The next time she saw the house, it was only for a few minutes. She needed her tea set, the green porcelain one her husband had given her on their 20th anniversary. She called ahead but didn't ask, just informed. Tessa answered the door, arms folded, mouth a line of indignation. You're just taking whatever you want now? Helen stepped past her without breaking stride. Always have, you just stopped noticing. She found the tea set in the same china cabinet where she'd left it, behind a stack of mismatched plates that hadn't been sorted in weeks. Dust lined the rim of one saucer. She cleaned it gently with the corner of her scarf and placed each piece back into its velvet-lined box. As she left, Daniel reached for conversation. We're still a family, Mom. Helen didn't stop walking. Families don't exile their elders to upstairs bedrooms. Back at the hotel, she opened the box, checked every piece for chips. None. She placed the set gently on the desk beneath the lamp and turned it on, letting the soft light warm the porcelain. Her phone buzzed. Janelle, you want me to fly in? Helen, book it. 3 minutes later, flight confirmation attached. At 9:07 p.m., another knock came at her door. She opened it to find Aiden holding a paper shopping bag and wearing his winter jacket with no gloves. I figured you forgot this. He handed her the scarf, deep burgundy wool, her favorite. She hadn't realized it was missing. Thank you, she said. He hovered in the doorway. Things are weird over there. They're acting like none of this matters. It does, Helen replied. They just haven't figured out how much. Aiden smiled, small but sincere. I like this version of you, the one that doesn't wait. She reached out and cupped his cheek, then waved him off. Go before you catch a cold. An hour later, a knock came again, not from the door, but the hotel's front desk line. This is Helen Wilkes, she answered. A low voice responded. Ma'am, we've received a legal notice addressed to you. It's from a new law firm. The sender is Daniel Wilkes's counsel. Helen adjusted the collar of her coat as she walked into Mr. Abramson's downtown office, the winter wind still clinging to her sleeves. The receptionist gave a sympathetic smile, as though she'd seen this kind of war before. Probably had. Bill Abramson looked up from his desk, reading glasses low on his nose. They filed it, he said without even a hello. Helen sat across from him, calm as pressed linen. What's the angle? He slid the documents across the table. The firm Daniel had retained, Kirkpatrick and Vale, was aggressive and flashy. The type with billboards by the freeway and TV ads between car wreck settlements. They're claiming informal transfer of residence, Bill said, arguing you relinquished intent to own when you allowed Daniel to live there and pay utilities. They've called it an implied gift of ownership through prolonged cohabitation. Helen let out a low, incredulous breath. A gift? That's their word, not mine. She opened her leather folder and pulled out a neatly clipped packet. Utility statements, mortgage payoffs, insurance renewals, all in her name. These prove continuity, not cohabitation. Bill smiled, the kind of slow grin that lawyers don't let loose unless they're already 5 steps ahead. And I've got something better. He pressed play on a small voice recorder. A grainy but clear audio file crackled to life. Daniel's voice, from a conversation 3 months ago. Yeah, Mom still technically owns the place, but we treat it like ours. She's not gonna change anything now. Helen blinked once. He said that to Tessa, on speaker. I was on the line, didn't know I was recording. That's Ohio for you. Single-party consent. He clicked it off. Now I do. Helen set another paper on the desk, a printed receipt from the restaurant where she'd waited in the cold, timestamp 7:08 p.m. She tapped it. This was the night they told me it was just family. 94 minutes in the car. Bill nodded solemnly. That goes in. But the opposing counsel had anticipated emotional leverage. Tessa filed her own affidavit, full of vague references to emotional stress, toxic control, and withdrawn affection. She'd even described Helen's quiet as weaponized silence. She's throwing spaghetti, Helen said, scanning the printout and hoping the court's hungry. Bill's brow lifted. Do we respond? Helen smiled softly. I don't need to. He will. 2 hours later, Aiden knocked on Bill's office door holding a USB drive. On it, every text, voicemail, and group chat where Helen had been left out, ignored, dismissed, uninvited. He'd even exported a thread where Tessa joked, maybe we do need an upstairs nurse if she keeps walking around like she's in charge. Bill plugged it in. He's thorough. Helen looked at Aiden. You're sure about this? I'm tired of watching them pretend they didn't do what they did, he said. You don't deserve revisionist history. Bill turned back to Helen. We've got enough to secure preliminary possession. I'll motion for it this afternoon. That night, Helen typed one line into her journal. Ownership is not emotional, it's contractual. The county court confirmed the hearing date by morning. By noon, Bill had received confirmation. He called her from the courthouse steps. Judge O'Neill approved the temporary motion. You now have full legal possession pending hearing. They can't claim occupancy. Helen stood by her hotel window, looking out at the bare trees swaying in the cold. She pressed the phone tighter to her ear. So if they walk out, she said, I can change the locks. Bill paused, then answered carefully. If they leave the property unsupervised, yes, you hold the key now. Helen looked down at the copy of the house key on the desk in front of her. The metal gleamed in the lamplight. They packed her dignity into silence. She packed their exit into boxes. The moving truck rolled into the Wilkes driveway at 9:02 a.m., slow and deliberate like it had nowhere else to be. The driver, a tall man in a beanie and work gloves, stepped out and checked the clipboard hanging from the side mirror. Delivery for Daniel and Tessa Wilkes, he said when Tessa opened the front door in her robe. She squinted. We didn't hire movers. You didn't, Helen said, stepping out from behind the truck. She wore a pressed navy coat and held a duplicate clipboard of her own. I did. Tessa's face contorted. Are you kidding me? Behind her, Daniel stood in the foyer, pale and still barefoot. Mom, what is this? Helen held his eyes for a moment. 30 days means 30 days. I'm helping you stick to it. The movers unloaded quickly. Each box was already labeled. Daniel in black marker, Tessa in red. The handwriting was methodical, almost clinical. Clothing, toiletries, bedroom decor, office files, all categorized, room by room. Tessa followed them in disbelief as they entered, grumbling. You can't just start throwing our stuff into boxes. No one's throwing anything, Helen said flatly. You left for the weekend. That's abandonment. The court says I hold possession. I'm just making good on it. Daniel looked exhausted, more deflated than angry. You could have waited until Monday. Helen stepped into the kitchen, hands folded in front of her. You were supposed to be out by Sunday. I gave you 4 weekends, and a lawyer. Tessa picked up a box marked bathroom, upper cabinet, then dropped it with a thud. This is psychotic. No, came a voice from the front door. This is performance art. Janelle stood in the doorway, sunglasses still on, her carry-on bag behind her and a bakery box balanced on her hip. I brought pastries. And wine. Couldn't miss the season finale. Helen allowed the corner of her mouth to lift her version of a smirk. Put me where you want me, Janelle said, striding inside like she owned the mortgage. I'm excellent at moral support and folding hand towels. Aiden arrived shortly after. He didn't ask questions. Just took a box and headed for the porch. Don't touch that, Tessa snapped, grabbing his arm as he reached for a second. You don't get to pick sides. He pulled back, eyes narrowed. I already did. She slapped the box out of his hands. You ungrateful little that's enough, Helen said. Her voice wasn't raised, but it cracked like a whip. Everyone froze. Daniel stepped between them, one hand on Tessa's arm. Stop, just stop. Helen turned to the movers. Please continue. They nodded. unaffected. This wasn't their first family standoff. By mid-afternoon, half the boxes were lined along the driveway. The February wind tugged at flaps of packing tape, and a snow squall flirted with the horizon. Inside, Janelle sipped her wine from a chipped coffee mug and watched through the living room window like it was a stage play. "You know," she said, "I was worried you'd hesitate. But this is poetry." Helen didn't respond. She was too focused, ticking off rooms on a checklist in her lap. Everything in order. No emotions, no speeches. By sunset, the movers had packed every last item from the upstairs master bedroom, down to the unused scented candles and a drawer full of expired coupons. Daniel stood on the porch, looking lost. Tessa paced by the curb, on her phone, whispering to someone who clearly wasn't answering. Helen said goodbye to neither. That night, once the house had gone still, Helen stood barefoot in the entryway. The air was oddly quiet without the constant TV hum or footsteps overhead. She turned the deadbolt, then unspooled the lock change kit from her coat pocket. Quiet tools, old habits. By the time the clock struck midnight, the locks had been changed, top to bottom. 3 doors, 4 keys, only one owner. They kept me waiting in parking lots. I kept them waiting on the porch. Daniel jiggled the front doorknob once, then twice. When it didn't budge, he stepped back and stared like the house had betrayed him. Tessa clutched a designer handbag against her chest and let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. What the hell? The February wind whipped through the empty driveway. Dead leaves scraped across the sidewalk like restless whispers. Daniel tried the garage keypad. Nothing. Then the back door. Same result. Every lock replaced. Every entry sealed. On the front porch, Helen sat on the swing in a wool coat, her back straight, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. Janelle lounged beside her, one leg crossed over the other, sunglasses on despite the gray sky. They looked like judges, not hosts. "You changed the locks." Daniel finally snapped, stepping onto the porch with the stomp of a man used to being heard. Helen didn't rise. She met his gaze evenly. "No, Daniel. I changed the story." He stared at her for a long beat, like he couldn't recognize the woman sitting in his childhood home. "You can't just lock us out. We still live here." "Correction," Helen said calmly. "You used to." Tessa barreled past him, heels clicking furiously against the wood. "I want to see proof. Where is the paperwork?" Janelle yawned and sipped her coffee. "Try the county clerk. Or Google. We're calling the cops." Tessa hissed. "This is illegal. It's harassment." Helen shrugged, unfazed. "Then call them. Let them explain it to you." 10 minutes later, a cruiser rolled up the street. The officer stepped out slowly, scanning the scene with the detached patience of someone who knew a family feud when he saw one. "Everyone calm?" he asked. Daniel stepped forward. "My mother changed the locks on the house I live in. She can't do that. We were gone for brunch and came back to this." The officer raised a brow, flipped through his notes. "You Daniel Wilkes?" "Yes." He turned to Helen. "Ma'am, do you have the property documents?" Helen handed him a sealed manila folder. Inside, the notarized trust, the deed, the judge's temporary order, every line in her name. The officer reviewed it silently for almost 2 full minutes. Then he looked up at Daniel. "She has legal possession. Court approved. You're no longer listed as a resident. I'm gonna have to ask you to vacate the property, sir." Daniel's face drained of color. "This is my home." "No," Helen said, rising to her feet for the first time. "It was my house. You just mistook my silence for surrender." Tessa turned toward the street where 2 neighbors watched from across the road, hands in coat pockets, pretending to be casual. "This is humiliating," she whispered. "They're all watching." Janelle stood, smirking. "Then maybe next time, don't stage your meltdown on the front lawn." Tessa broke. Tears came fast, theatrical and loud, but the audience had moved on. The neighbors looked away. The officer shifted awkwardly. Even Daniel didn't comfort her. Aiden arrived moments later, walking up the sidewalk with his backpack slung low and earbuds still in. He paused at the base of the porch. "What's going on?" Helen looked at him with calm warmth. "They found out." He took in the scene, the cruiser, the suitcases on the lawn, his parents' blank stares, and nodded. Then he did something unexpected. He didn't cross the threshold. Daniel looked at him, pleading. "Come inside, son." But Aiden just stood there, hands in his jacket pockets. "No, I think I'll stay out here." For the first time all day, Helen's expression shifted, a flicker of pride passing behind her eyes like sunrise through fog. That night, after the porch had emptied and the house was quiet again, Helen sat at the kitchen table with a single document in front of her, her will. She read every line twice, then picked up her pen and amended the beneficiary section. All assets, real and liquid, to be transferred solely to Aiden Wilkes. Daniel Wilkes removed. Irrevocable. They always expected me to explain. I gave them silence instead. Helen stood in front of the fireplace mantel, holding the photo in both hands, the one from the family dinner she was never invited to. The print was glossy, all smiles and raised wine glasses, lit by restaurant chandeliers. She remembered exactly what it felt like to sit in the parking lot that night, watching them through the glass like a ghost trying to re-enter her own life. She stared at the photo one last time. Then she turned and dropped it, face down, into the kitchen trash bin. The frame cracked softly against a banana peel and 2 torn grocery receipts. She didn't even flinch. The next morning, Helen rolled up her sleeves and walked into the dining room. She hadn't hosted anyone in that space since before her husband passed, and certainly not since Tessa had claimed it with her centerpieces and color-coded place settings. Now it would be something else entirely. Bookshelves, she told Aiden later that week as he helped her pull down the dusty drapes. Floor to ceiling. Paint color, he asked. Midnight blue. You're really going for it, huh? He grinned. She smiled back. It's not their house anymore. It might as well be mine. The sound of paint rollers filled the afternoons. Aiden played old jazz from his phone as they worked, the brassy notes curling through the empty hallways. They talked about his graduation, his part-time job at the auto shop, and the scholarship he hadn't told his parents he'd applied for. Helen didn't ask why he'd kept it secret. She already knew. When Janelle poked her head in one morning holding 2 mugs of coffee, she blinked at the blue walls and fresh trim. Well, damn, you really gutted the whole room. I gutted the past, Helen said. The room just came with it. They sat at the kitchen table later that afternoon, sunlight hitting the wood just right. Janelle sipped her coffee and watched her sister in quiet admiration. You seem more like yourself now, she said. I forgot who that was for a while, Helen replied. I remembered when I stopped letting people talk over her. No calls came from Daniel. No texts, no apologies. Tessa hadn't dared show up since the police cruiser incident. Their silence used to ache like a missing limb. Now it felt like space wide and free. The silence said, we have no control anymore. And Helen didn't fill it. 1 week later, she set the dining table for 4. It wasn't a holiday. There was no anniversary, no family obligation. Just a dinner. Warm lights, homemade beef stew, Janelle's sourdough, Aiden's favorite peach cobbler. Carly, the neighbor from 2 doors down, arrived with a bottle of red and a shy smile. Still feels weird coming over without Tessa running the show. You'll find it's much more enjoyable now, Janelle said, already pouring wine. They ate slowly. No phones, no raised voices, no one being asked to excuse themselves. They laughed, real laughter that didn't punch down. Aiden told a story about a customer at the auto shop who thought oil changes were optional. Carly shared gossip about a neighbor's pet chicken escaping into traffic. Helen listened, nodded, passed the bread and topped off glasses. She looked like the host, but she felt like the home. As the table emptied and the last candle burned low, the landline rang in the background. It was a muted, patient sound, not a demand, but a summons. Helen rose and picked it up. Mrs. Wilkes? Came Mr. Wilkes? Abramson's steady voice. Yes, Bill. We've received a formal settlement offer from Daniel's attorney. They're asking for negotiation. They want to talk. Helen didn't speak. Not yet. The envelope arrived with sharp corners and an embossed return address, Kirkpatrick and Vale, legal counsel. Helen didn't open it at first. She left it on the edge of the kitchen table, next to her tea, letting it sit like something sour left to cool. She already knew what was inside. Janelle raised an eyebrow as she passed through the kitchen with a crossword puzzle in hand. You gonna open that or light it on fire? Some things deserve both, Helen replied, reaching for the letter opener. The contents were neatly typed, 6 pages total. Helen read them slowly, then again, each word coating her throat in the same bitter varnish she'd tasted that day in the parking lot. The settlement offer was simple in tone and acidic in implication. Daniel Wilkes agrees to drop all legal claims in exchange for 32% of the home's appraised value, payable within 90 days. She laughed, an actual guttural laugh that echoed off the freshly painted dining room walls. Janelle peeked back in. I take it that's a no? Helen didn't answer. She pulled a red pen from the junk drawer, scrawled across the front page in clean block letters. Declined, with finality. then folded it, stuffed it in the return envelope, and sent it back the same afternoon. By nightfall, the fallout had begun. Tessa's social media was the first to light up, an Instagram story of her sipping wine on a balcony, captioned, "Some parents forget how to love, but I won't forget how to heal." Then a Facebook post, "It's wild how some people can erase you after everything you've done for them." Vague enough to dodge liability, obvious enough to poke the hornet's nest. Aiden texted Helen a series of screenshots without commentary. Just the digital receipts of Tessa's slow, passive unraveling. Mr. Abramson replied within an hour. Subject: cease and desist, in process. Will file a digital notice for defamation and false implication. Already drafting language. Helen stared at the monitor, her jaw tight but relaxed in a way that surprised even her. The drama no longer cut deep, it floated on the surface now, like oil she'd learned not to stir. Janelle leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "You regret any of this yet?" Helen turned, eyes steady. "Only that I waited." Outside, wind stirred the branches against the side of the house. The home felt quieter now, more honest, like it had shed its ghosts and was finally settling into truth. The next morning, Helen met a young woman at the curb, a nurse named Camille, freshly transferred to Columbus General, quiet-voiced but direct. They walked through the upstairs unit together, the old in-law suite that hadn't been used in years. Camille marveled at the built-in bookshelves and wide window over the backyard. Her fingers traced the banister with care. "I'm clean, quiet, and punctual with rent," she said, smiling. "I don't host, I don't drink, I work nights." Helen nodded. "What do you need from me?" "Just peace and a place that feels safe." Helen looked around at the walls she'd repainted herself, the new locks she'd installed, the silence that now hummed with presence instead of absence. "I can offer that," she said. Camille signed the lease on the spot, date stamped and witnessed by Janelle, who raised her glass like it was a baptism. "Here's to tenants who knock first." Helen smiled as Camille left to grab her things. In the quiet, she folded the lease and placed it gently in her document binder, right between the trust deed and the revised will. Camille arrived on a Sunday morning, driving a weathered Civic with a cracked bumper and a trunk full of her life in labeled totes. No entourage, no expectations, just a calm energy that wrapped the porch like soft wool. Helen met her at the walkway, gloved hands tucked into her coat pockets. The wind carried the faint scent of rain and thawing earth. "You sure it's not too small up there?" Helen asked. Camille smiled. "I lived in a hospital dorm during residency. Anything with a window and silence is a palace." She moved her own boxes, careful with each one. Aiden showed up an hour later with a tool set and coaxial cables, offering help before anyone had to ask. "Wi-Fi's a little tricky upstairs," he explained. "Old walls mess with the signal." He climbed the narrow stairs with Camille, the two of them chatting about routers and routers' inability to behave. Downstairs, Helen brewed tea in a quiet kitchen that no longer held echoes of slammed cabinet doors or passive sighs. For the first time in years, she could hear herself think. Later that week, she found Camille restocking the pantry without being asked. "Figured I'd pick up a few staples," she said, placing items on the shelf alphabetically. "Got some of those ginger snaps you like. Saw you had the tin." Helen blinked. "How did you know?" Camille shrugged. "Saw the lid on the counter. Just a guess." That night, Helen pulled out a heavy recipe card from the back of her cookbook, a stew her husband had once made every winter, written in his blocky engineer's handwriting. She hadn't cooked it in over a decade. "You free tomorrow?" she asked Camille, holding out the card. "For stew lessons?" Camille grinned. "Always." The kitchen filled with the smell of simmering beef, thyme, and garlic. Camille chopped carrots while Helen stirred slowly, explaining how the meat needed just a little more time than you thought, but not a second more. They didn't rush. When Aiden stopped by later that evening to return a borrowed socket wrench, the house smelled like memory and comfort and something else, belonging. "This smells amazing," he said, nose twitching. Camille handed him a bowl. "We made extra." Helen watched him eat at the counter, his knee bouncing against the cabinet door like it did when he was a boy. He looked up between spoonfuls. "You seem different, Grandma." "How so?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Lighter," he said. "Like the house stopped pressing on you." Helen wiped her hands on a towel and looked around. "It has." The days grew longer. Light returned to the house. On Thursdays, Camille left fresh flowers on the kitchen table, a ritual with no announcement, no fanfare. Daisies, sunflowers, a few sprigs of eucalyptus. Sometimes they were tucked into old mason jars, sometimes wrapped in paper and string. They don't even match the curtains, Janelle joked once, sipping her coffee and motioning to the cheerful arrangement. That's the point, Helen replied. Janelle leaned back in her chair and surveyed the house with slow approval. The freshly painted library, the organized pantry, the humming stillness that had replaced all that noise. Now that's family, she said. That afternoon, Helen sat by the window, rereading a letter from Aiden's school about his graduation. She smiled without thinking. Then the landline rang. Only a few people use that number anymore, she answered. Helen Wilkes. Mr. Abramson's tone was calm but direct. Helen, just a heads up. Daniel filed a last-minute emergency motion to contest the estate freeze. Helen's eyes narrowed. How last minute? Well, he said, it was postmarked 1 hour after the county deadline. She exhaled, not from relief but recognition. So it's invalid? As invalid as a promise he never meant to keep. Helen didn't reply right away. She just turned her chair slightly, watching Camille in the garden through the window, arranging stones along the edge of the walkway. She smiled. They thought they could stall. I let time close the door. Mr. Abramson's call came just after sunrise, his voice wrapped in finality. It's done, Helen. The deadline passed. Their motion was tossed before it even hit the clerk's desk. Helen didn't flinch. She sat at the breakfast nook, tea steeping beside her, the window fogged with breath from a world slowly warming. The garden Camille had planted was beginning to sprout shy green shoots. Spring had arrived, and with it peace. No more filings? She asked, even though she already knew the answer. None that matter, Abramson said. Daniel's officially barred from estate claims, permanently. The court closed the docket this morning, it's over. Helen said nothing for a long moment. Then she whispered, good. An hour later, a courier arrived in a rain-dampened jacket holding the final estate form like a truce flag. He handed it over without fanfare. Helen brought it inside and placed it on the dining room table where the old dinner photo used to sit. The paper was simple. 1 page, 3 signatures. Her name printed neatly in the space where legacy and law had finally met. Final revocation, no appeal. She signed it slowly, her pen steady, her breath even. Then she folded it into the return envelope, sealed it, and stood. The sound of the tape pressing closed was the softest thunder she'd ever heard. Across town, Tessa was on her second glass of wine by noon. Her post went live at 12:04 p.m., filtered in rose gold with a caption that oozed faux poetry. No one told us we'd be cut off. Some people forget the love they once had. Vague enough for deniability. Obvious enough for rage. Helen didn't usually read that drivel, but Aiden forwarded it to her with no message, just the link and a small screenshot. Helen stared at it for 5 full seconds. Then she did something no one expected. She replied, publicly, on the platform where Tessa had spent years crafting image over integrity. Helen typed without flinching. You told me where I stood. I listened. 12 words. That was all. But it caught fire. The comment thread erupted. Hearts, thumbs, a sea of stunned silence from those who knew just enough of the family history to realize something permanent had happened. Aiden called her later that evening. You really did it, he said. His voice sounded part reverent, part stunned. I did. He let out a slow laugh. You don't sound like someone who just won a war. I'm not sure I did, Helen said. I think I just stopped losing. Outside, dusk settled over the front porch, painting everything in soft bruises and lavender. Camille passed by the hallway carrying a laundry basket, earbuds in, humming to something jazzy and upbeat. The house didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like air. Helen moved to the hall closet and pulled out a frame she had purchased weeks ago but hadn't dared hang. Inside was the stamped court order, formal and cold but final. She carried it to the entryway wall and held it there, deciding on placement. Just to the right of the door, eye level, not loud but unmistakable. Janelle stepped beside her, glass of white wine in hand. You really gonna hang it? Every time someone walks in, they'll know what not to try. Janelle grinned. Iconic. Helen hammered in the nail herself. 1 strike, then a second, then she hung it, straight, balanced, permanent. She took 1 step back and studied it. The court seal glinted under the hallway light. Beneath it, in small type, all estate claims are hereafter closed, irrevocable under law. She said nothing. She didn't need to. They hosted without me. I hosted without them. Now it was her turn. The smell of roasted garlic and thyme filled the house, seeping into the floorboards like it belonged there. Helen moved through the kitchen with quiet confidence, adjusting heat levels, checking her stew, folding cloth napkins like it was muscle memory. There was no panic, no noise, no chaos, just rhythm. Outside, the porch light flicked on as dusk fell over the street. Aidan's car pulled into the driveway first. He emerged with a casserole dish in hand, grinning. "Let's not lie before dinner," she said, smiling as she took the dish. "But I appreciate the effort." Moments later, Camille arrived with a bowl of marinated olives and a bottle of chilled Riesling. Her hair was pulled back, eyes bright, cheeks pink from the cool air. "The nurse in me says wine is a poor source of hydration. The woman in me says it's essential." Janelle entered last, balancing a tray of lemon bars and a speaker tucked under her arm. "I brought dessert and music. You're welcome." Within 20 minutes, the dining table was a mosaic of colors and smells: stuffed mushrooms, sourdough slices, caramelized onions, herb rice, the golden sheen of buttered green beans. Dishes touched but didn't crowd. Voices filled the space, but never competed. Helen took a moment to look around. No accusations, no side eyes or performance politeness. No one was pretending to be better than they were. It wasn't loud, it was alive. She stepped to the head of the table and lifted her glass. Her voice didn't rise. She didn't need it to. It landed like warmth on everyone's skin. To people who knock before entering, to people who ask instead of assume, to people who bring food instead of judgment. Laughter scattered through the group, real and effortless. "To this house," she finished, finally feeling like home again. They clinked glasses. Camille wiped a corner of her eye discreetly. Aidan nodded like he'd just learned a secret worth keeping. Janelle raised her fork and said, "This was overdue." Later, after plates had been scraped clean and the second round of lemon bars disappeared, Helen disappeared briefly into the living room. She returned with a record, her husband's favorite, still in its original sleeve. Chet Baker Sings. She set it on the player, adjusted the needle, and let the soft, melancholic trumpet spill into the room. The music filled the silence in a way words never could. Janelle stood first, pulling Camille up with her. "Dance with me, nurse girl. Don't make me beg." Camille laughed, startled, but followed willingly. Aidan spun the volume knob just enough to flood the walls with brass and longing. Aidan spun the volume knob just enough to flood the walls with brass and longing. Helen sat back, watching the trio move and laugh, and live in the home she had once felt banished from. Her eyes shimmered in the light of the sideboard lamp, but she didn't cry. She had waited too long for this moment to waste it on tears. As the night wound down, and dishes returned to cabinets, and leftover containers stacked neatly in the fridge, Aidan lingered behind, drying the last wine glass with a dish towel. "Hey, Grandma," he said, not looking up. "Yes? Want to come to my graduation next month?" The question hung in the air, not because the answer was uncertain, but because of everything behind it. All the times she hadn't been invited, all the times she'd been expected to stay upstairs or outside, or silent. Helen turned toward him. "Front row," she said. "He made me wait in the car. I made him wait by the phone." The call came just after 10. Mr. Abramson stood at his office window, watching early summer leaves shiver in the breeze outside. His desk was clean, except for one thin file marked Wilkes, Daniel, closure packet. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Abramson, this is Daniel Wilkes. I was told I could follow up today about the estate matter." The voice was quieter than usual, hesitant, too polite. It lacked the edge Daniel used to carry like a blade. "Yes, Daniel," Abramson said, slipping on his glasses and opening the folder. "This is your legal update." The line was so quiet, the sound of a clock ticking in the background came through. "All claims," Abramson said clearly, "are closed." Silence. Then Daniel cleared his throat. "So there's no appeal?" "No," Abramson replied. "There was a window. You missed it. Nothing is owed to you under current estate law. You've been officially excluded from future inheritance by irrevocable amendment. Everything was filed, processed, and sealed." Daniel's voice cracked. "She really did it." "She did." A longer pause this time, then came the question Abramson had expected. "Will she ever speak to me?" The lawyer didn't blink. "She already did." Click. At that very moment, 3 miles across town, Helen stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the collar of her blouse. Her fingers moved carefully over the soft lavender fabric. The color Aidan said brought out her strength. Camille handed her a delicate silver brooch. An old one, shaped like a pine branch, passed down from Helen's own mother. "You look sharp," Camille said, offering an approving nod. "I look like someone who belongs in the front row," Helen replied. She glanced down at her shoes, polished, low-heeled, steady. No more waiting outside, no more invitations that never came. Today she walked in on her own terms. Outside, Aiden stood beside Janelle's car, cap already askew on his head, beaming like someone who'd finally stopped shrinking to fit inside other people's shadows. "Ready, Grandma?" The ride to the high school gym was quiet in a peaceful way. No tension, no old wounds festering beneath the surface. Just the windows cracked to let in warm air and the low hum of jazz from the stereo Chet Baker again. She recognized the tune. Camille sat in the back, flipping through a program. "Valedictorian," she said, nudging Aiden. "Not too bad for someone who didn't even unpack boxes until mid-semester." Aiden shrugged modestly. Had the right environment for once. At the ceremony, Helen sat between Camille and Janelle, holding a folded tissue she never needed. She clapped when Aiden's name was called, stood when he walked the stage, and didn't sit back down until he turned, diploma in hand, and gave a small private nod in her direction. Afterward, they stood together on the lawn, sunlight warming the backs of their necks, the distant sound of families posing and shouting names into phones. Camille pulled out her phone. "Smile." Helen didn't pose, she just let her face soften the way it always used to when her husband caught her off guard with a compliment. Click. The photo showed 4 people, Aiden with his arm around his grandmother's shoulder, Camille laughing, and Janelle mid-toast with a Diet Coke bottle. It wasn't curated. It was real. As the others turned to walk toward the car, Helen lingered a moment longer. She looked down at her hands, her steady feet, her freedom, and then she whispered to herself, just loud enough for the wind to carry, "I made the right people wait." She followed them to the car. This time she rode in the front seat,